I've been called Gus since I started school, and I'm named for my mother's grandfather, who emigrated from Norway at age 11. Nancy Schneiderwind establishes that our autobiographies, our experience, identity, beliefs, and values shape our teaching. The development of identity probably starts with our immediate caregivers. In my case, my parents, Michael and Mary Ellen, met as grad students at the University of Southern California studying English and American Lit. And I've got this notion that they were offered work in the East, so they drove along the coast of California to San Francisco, where they took a right in the summer of love. I was born shortly after that summer. My folks were faculty on the tenure track at UVM, but their marriage wasn't and didn't last much longer. And here's where my story of being around language, real lived language used in context and with purpose, began. My new stepdad Carl was from Boston, and his parents still lived there. Ludwig and Irma Schmida had immigrated from Germany in the 1930s. He, fatherless in a small Black Forest town, had left for opportunities in America. They each had come to Boston and had found work as a maid and cook and as a handyman and a chauffeur. Irma had come with her fatherless young son that she put into a home so she could work, and she saw him once a week. But once Ludwig learned of her son, he proposed immediately. They often spoke German around the house, and deeply instilled in me an awareness of others and respect for their needs. They had tenants downstairs in the apartment, and we all had to walk quietly when we visited. So for the next years, I heard German regularly as a part of everyday, normal communication. And my mom's parents in Wisconsin were both first-generation Scandinavian Americans. Grandma Hyen said grace in Norwegian before dinner and sang Swedish hymns while playing the piano when we'd visit her in the summer. I think one of the details that matters so much for me in my experience as a third-generation American is that while we had assimilated, we also held our ethnic German and Scandinavian heritages dear. We celebrated our foods, dances, art, and ceremonies, and didn't hide those. So thus far into developing this AutoEthnography, I see a few major themes or epiphanies in my remembered life story to date. Family is a thread, education, and language. And for the most part, the language experiences have been immersion-based. And by immersion, I mean the language is used richly and deeply for functional purpose. These are fully lived experiences. And now starts the moving thread for the next 25 years. Before I was 30, I had lived abroad for nearly 6 years in Scandinavia and Asia, and in 6 states from Rhode Island to California. Moving can have many effects on our growth patterns, including helping to develop flexibility and adaptiveness. Americans are said to smile more because we don't have a stable in-group. Our hundreds of years of immigration by choice or by force cause us to rely on nonverbal communication. We want to fit in and assimilate. Smiles help with building trust and cooperation. So I smile a lot. I know my family, but I don't have close friends from before my high school years. Most of us know the term Army brats, the kids who live in one place for up to 2 years and then move on. Well, I'm a faculty brat. And when I was still 4, we moved to St. Paul, Minnesota for my stepdad to work for the University of Minnesota. We lived in the Torre de San Miguel housing projects, and I attended bilingual Spanish-English kindergarten there as one of the few non-Hispanic kids. And here's where I became Gus, because my full name Ganarius was just too much for a kid to spell in school. Then, a new job brought us back to the East, this time to a position for Carl at the University of Rhode Island. But after 4 years in the East, Mom got a job offer at a Minnesota State University campus in west central Minnesota, up near Fargo, North Dakota, much closer to her parents. So we moved again to start 5th grade in Moorhead. In our new community, we participated as a family in the Scandinavian Heritage Society of the Red River Valley events, like the Santa Lucia Festival's Lucia Tåg, Midsommar, and Lutefisk dinners. All the visible cultural elements that keep descendants of immigrants feeling connected to the old world and to the perspectives, products, and practices of their ancestors. And then my language learning really leveled up a bit when I applied for a Rotary Youth Ambassador Scholarship for 11th grade. So I found out that I could go to Sweden shortly before I would turn 16. In August, I packed my bags, flew to Stockholm, and we drove to Eskilstuna to live with the Moore and Far Nilsson family and 2 brothers for the next year. Landing with no Swedish language skills, I had an amazing immersion experience that I was somehow well prepared for. Amazingly, all the heritage activities that I had done back in Minnesota were still practiced in modern day. More Santa Lucia, midsummer dancing, and Lutefisk. I fit in here. I thrived and I learned deeply. Language-wise, I passed the Rikstest, the Swedish university entrance exam, in the spring before I returned to the United States. and I felt like that really acknowledged my hard work and capacity to communicate appropriately. Back home in west central Minnesota for the fall of my senior year, my mother won an exchange program to Iceland and was able to take the family. So mom, dad, sister, and I left in January to live in Reykjavik and returned home in August to start college at Gustavus Adolphus College, a small school in St. Peter, Minnesota, where they even had a Swedish major. When I got to Gustavus, I thought I'd do something practical, so I took physics for about 2 weeks before I dropped and transferred into an English Lit course. Because of my limited high school years in a math classroom due to traveling, I simply didn't have the academic skills, specifically algebra, to succeed in those classes. But I thrived in my English major and my Scandinavian Studies major. Growing up around teachers and literature professors seemed to have rubbed off, giving me rich funds of knowledge to succeed, and I was nominated to the English Honor Society and given a teaching assistant job in the department for Dr. Deborah Downs-Myers. I returned to Sweden for my junior year at Uppsala University, and that summer I met up with my cousin Tor for us to take a 9-week bike tour from Milan to Oslo. This was a privileged opportunity to not work that summer. Back at Gustavus, living in the Svenska Huset, I graduated with degrees in English and Scandinavian Studies, bartended for a couple of years, and volunteered with the American Refugee Committee. Here I helped high school-aged refugee kids from all over the world, though mainly Cambodia and Vietnam, Russia, and Nicaragua, adapt to American life and education systems. They had come to the U.S. with their families to escape violence and discrimination and to start new lives. And with that work, I realized I wanted to teach. Soon, I was accepted to the University of Minnesota's Scandinavian Languages and Lit Master's program with a graduate assistantship to teach Swedish. Teaching Swedish was a big step for me to understand how other students would want to connect with their heritage. After 2 years, I got a different graduate fellowship in the language lab. I was given a chance to take my existing technology skills and share them with other instructors at the U in support of teaching and learning language and culture across all the programs there. So my language, technology, and teaching skills were getting stronger, and I was successful leading in the classroom. But after 3 years, I was not progressing well in my studies, and I struggled with the literature part of the program. I had started to take more classes from the ESL side, and noticing that I really wanted to do that kind of teaching, I took a leave of absence and got a job teaching English in Japan. In Japan, my wife and I lived in a small rice farming village about 150 kilometers east of Tokyo. We became the face and voice of America for our students in the public schools where we taught. I learned Japanese, and I passed the 4th level Japanese language proficiency exam. When my daughter Emma was born there, we even got a $3,000 baby stipend for doing our part to curb the dropping birth rate. Back in the U.S. after 3 years, I returned to the University of Minnesota's TESOL MA program and a job in the language lab. So my grad school years focused on developing my skills in applied linguistics and second language acquisition. What an amazing process of understanding ourselves so we can understand others. My thesis at Minnesota was advised by Elaine Turone and her work in sociolinguistics, putting attention on the language learner as a way of seeing learners in context, and that variation from norms is not error that should be corrected, but a sign of potential new language. I was fortunate also to be mentored by Janice Rokamp in the CLA Language Lab, who expected our work to serve the language learning profession through the integration of technology and encouraged innovation and connection to learning. Her support set me up for my next steps in my career. I based my abilities in a modern European language, a modern Asian language, 3 years of experience in language lab, and solid instructional technology skills to apply for a job, which I won in the language labs at Cal State Monterey Bay. So we picked up and moved to California's Central Coast. I was attracted to the campus for their commitment to social justice through service learning experience requirements, language proficiency demonstrated for every major, and a technology-infused academic environment complete with a capstone research project. The approach to language instruction on this campus was a communicative basis, and even more significant was their inclusive naming of the program World Languages, in contrast to Foreign Language Department. We are not helping students learn something foreign and different, but we're encouraging them to join into a broader world of communication and competence with skills and knowledge of another culture and its perspectives. And I'm deeply of the opinion that teaching is servant leadership in the Greenleafian version of a person who intuitively serves and learns to lead later. So taking the frontline position in language learning and technology on a small campus put me into the position of advocating for the field in the form of leadership. I co-hosted an annual conference for 10 years. This led to me serving for various organizations that serve language and technology. I've worked as a teacher on and off for nearly 30 years, and always in support of the classroom experience for language learning, trying to create equity for all learners of all languages, and encouraging those students in the process of learning a language to dive deep into this opportunity to explore a diverse point of view. From Noam Chomsky, we believe that we all have the innate faculty, for a little black box if you prefer, for language and communication. Thus, from my value set, we are all even right from the start. We're both brought in with the same capacity for language and communication. I suspect that in contradiction to the movement and travel of my early years, I've now been in one place for nearly 20 years, and I've made efforts to create community, such as through the arts, running a community art studio in Monterey with my wife, and providing statewide advocacy for represented employees in the CSU system. Toni Morrison observed that words and language are generative and make the meaning that secures our difference, our human difference, the way in which we are like no other life. As she said, we do language. That may be the measure of our lives.